Pace community, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time out to want to be here and be present with me. I'm super excited to get into episode 2 with you, but I just wanted to first say thank you for the overwhelming support of episode 1. Lots of people gave some great feedback and really enjoyed watching that video, and I was just so happy to hear that. So thank you so much for the support. I think Denzel Talks is going to be a fortnightly release schedule. So if you want some content in between that, definitely check out the Pace pod. So alternating weeks, you'll get one podcast episode, one Denzel Talks episode. So some great content on the Pace pod. I do that with my cousin Shivrin, so it is a very fun time. So definitely have a listen to that. So without further ado, let's get into episode 2. Which is going to be all about ego. And now I mentioned ego briefly in the first video, but I really wanted to hone into it and give my thoughts around ego and give my tips about how to deal with it, because I think for me personally, and a lot of people say that at the end of the day, we want to live without ego, right? That is the ultimate goal, but no one's perfect. So if that's your ultimate goal, what are the habits that you can do to work towards that point? And it also really helps to acknowledge that goal is pure perfection, which no one is ever going to hit. So what are the habits we can kind of build to help us on that path and stay on that path towards that goal for as long as possible? So actually, there's one thing I do have to do before we get into this topic. I'll be right back. Bit of a surprise, I know. I'm still getting used to it myself, so it'll be like this for a while. So anyway, so what I wanted to start off with is, what is ego? So ego is a part of all of us, but it shows up in different people in different levels and varying degrees. And the reason that ego is bad is because it just wants to identify with something. It wants to latch on to something, and it will never be satisfied. So if that is your looks, how you look, e.g. with my hair, that can be part of ego. And I've always wanted to go bald, but I never did. But why didn't I? Why wouldn't I just try it, And it all came back to after I became aware of my ego. It came back to ego and being that people won't find you attractive. People won't think you're cool. People think you look weird, like whatever it is. Because everyone was used to me in this way. And because I myself was used to myself in that way, ego was latching onto it. But as we all know, change is good. So that's why I decided to do this, because it's something I've always wanted to do, and now I'm at a point where I feel that I am aware of my ego and I'm quite on top of it, I guess you could say. This made sense for me to do it. So ego being within all of us, it's really easy to just let it take a hold. So whether that's job, you identify with the job you do. Oh, I'm a senior architect. Oh, I'm the chief financial officer of this company. There's a difference between saying that and acknowledging that is part of your life. And then there's don't you know who I am? Like, I'm this person, That's when ego has taken a hold of you and you're completely identified with it. And in those situations, you're completely unaware. And that's probably, I guess, the worst thing is the lack of awareness, because if you're aware in those moments, you'll be able to redirect your energy or acknowledge it and change your response. So if someone says, I don't like what you're doing with your business, as an example, then instead of being like, well, I don't really care what you think, or, well, I don't like what you're doing with this and this, you can redirect your response to be, okay, what is it that you don't really like about it? And then you're open to feedback. You're more receptive to feedback than if you were identified with ego. So that's just one example of why identifying with ego is bad. And, it's within all of us, as I said before. So we just need to slowly become aware of the little changes in us in certain situations. In certain social groups, do we act differently? When we meet someone for the first time, do we tell a story of ourselves that is not our normal selves? Are we amplifying our role? Are we amplifying certain things we've accomplished? But that's not really us. So what I want you to take away from this video is that the end goal is to become aware of ego and how it pops up and what it's attaching to. Because you can also attach to things that aren't so great. If you, for example, have a mental illness, your ego will attach to that and potentially can actually reinforce that spiral of whatever it is in that mental illness. It can actually make it worse. It can make it harder to overcome. It's like, you don't want to overcome this. This is who you are. But that's just your ego identifying and attaching to that specific thing, and that is not you, and you are not your ego. So remember to bring awareness to those situations. And in those moments, think, why am I acting a bit differently? Why am I saying this when I don't really mean it? Why am I laughing on this joke, or why did I say that when I don't mean it? These are all things that are normally linked back to your ego. And if you want some more information on it, I highly recommend reading A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle and Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty, because those two books have given me a very deep insight into ego, and then I've obviously been able to translate that into my life, and then now that's what I'm trying to give to you, is how I've identified ego and how I see ego. One last point I'd like to add onto ego is it's not a competition. And for me, this was probably the biggest thing, is I used to be overly competitive in whatever I did. I wanted to be really good. And, at the time before, I would say, I'm just a competitive person. It's just my nature. But it's really my ego. It's like, if I was good at something that I'd just done, that's boosting my ego. That's boosting the way people look at me in that moment. They think, he's cool. He's really good at this. He's athletic. He's sporty. But it's really not. It's just ego, and it's just feeding into the ego. And I've noticed that when you get into situations now, when I get into situations now, and I'm aware of my ego, I can see my response changing before it actually happens. So in those situations before where I was overly competitive, I'd be annoyed if someone was beating me, even if it's something I've never done before. Instead of just being in the moment, enjoying that moment. I used to be overly competitive about bowling, so I'd always say to my mates, let's go bowling, what's your high score, all this and that. But when I became aware of it, and when I identified as ego, all these little things start to kind of fade away. And it does take time. It doesn't happen overnight. I'm talking over a year and a half for me, for things to start fading away. And when you do, you just kind of go into all interactions. You're eager to learn. You're open to this different perspective. You're not expecting something. You're not wanting people to feed into your ego. You can tell when other people are acting out of ego, which also helps you in the way that you respond or the way you help them. It is a really nice and freeing experience to identify ego and what roles it's playing in your life. And when you start being aware of it, and you stop your ego from latching onto them and feeding off them, it'll start to starve and it'll start to go back and back and back. But don't fall into the trap of then starting to think, oh, that person's so identified by their ego. Because then that's your ego resurfacing, thinking that you're better than them. We're all just trying to be our best selves each and every day. And I hope this video has helped you learn something and helps you overcome any big ego issues that you have. Thank you so much for watching this episode, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.